Order. Mr. Carpenter, please call the roll.
Senators Bridges, Sergeant John Cook, Colorado Army National Guard. Quorum. Specialist 5th Class, Larry W. Crowder, United States Army. Danielson, Donovan, Finberg, Fields, Foote. Lieutenant Colonel Bob Gardner, United States Air Force Reserve. Janal, Gonzalez, Hanson, Captain Owen Hill, United States Air Force.
Excused.
Heisey, Holbert, Lee, Lundeen, Lundeen,
Excused.
Marble, Moreno, Pedersen,
Excused.
Priola, Captain Bob Rankin, United States Army. Rodriguez, Scott,
Excused.
Smallwood, Sonnenberg, Story, Tate, Todd, Williams, Winter, Woodward, Zenzinger, Corporal Leroy M. Garcia, United States Marine Corps.
Rock. With 31 present, 0 absent, 4 excused, we have a quorum. Will you please stand for the presentation of the colors? The colors will be presented by the detachment of the United States Marine Combat Logistics Battalion 453 at Buckley Air Force Base. Marines participating are Sergeant Timothy Mayo, Corporal Henry Perez Diaz, Corporal Pleasant Matthews, Corporal Phillips Clark, and Sergeant Alexander Van Aston. The Senate will stand in a brief recess. The Senate will come back to order. Mr. Carpenter, please add Senator Lundin to the roll. Please remain standing for the presentation of the colors. Sarah Gardner, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing. This morning we are pleased to have Sergeant Ron McKay from the Colorado National Guard 101st Army Band as our musical guest here to perform the Star-Spangled Banner.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Members and guests, will you please join me in thanking not only the Marine Corps for the presentation of the colors, but also Sergeant Ron McKay for the Star-Spangled Banner. Approval of the journal. Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the reading of the journal for Thursday, February 6, 2020 be dispensed with and the journal be approved as corrected by the Secretary.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Senate Services.
Correctly engrossed Senate Bill 93. Correctly re-engrossed Senate Bill 3761.
Committee reports.
February 6, 2020, the Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources had consideration had hearing on the following appointments, organizations, and appointments to be placed on the consent calendar confirmed. Members of the Colorado Wildlife Habitat Stamp Committee. For terms expiring December 31st, 2022, Thomas Lambrosio, Durango, Colorado, a sports person reappointed. Astor Johnson, Ruston, Denver, Colorado, representative of a national and regionally recognized conservation organization whose mission is focused on non-game wildlife and whose membership is composed primarily of non-game wildlife users appointed. February 6, 2020, the Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources had consideration had hearing on the following appointments, organizations, and appointments to be placed on the consent calendar confirmed. Members of the Colorado Wildlife Habitat Stamp Committee for terms expiring December 31st, 2023. Brett Ackerman of Colorado Springs, Colorado, to serve as an ex-officio member representing the Division of Wildlife, appointed. Priya Nanjapa of Lakewood, Colorado, to serve as representative of national and regionally recognized conservation organizations whose missions are focused on non-game wildlife and whose membership is composed primarily of non-game wildlife, appointed. February 6, 2020, Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 54 be postponed indefinitely. February 6, 2020, Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 130 be referred favorably to Committee on Appropriations. February 6, 2020, Committee on Transportation and Energy have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 132 be referred favorably to Committee on Appropriations. February 6, 2020, Committee on Transportation and Energy have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 124 be amended as follows. As amended be referred to Committee to hold the favorable recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 6, 2020, Committee on Transportation and Energy have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 30 be amended as follows. As amended be referred to Committee on Appropriations with a favorable recommendation. February 6, 2020, Committee on Transportation and Energy have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 115 be referred favorably to Committee on Appropriations. February 6, 2020, Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 8 be amended as follows. As amended be referred to Committee on the Whole with a favorable recommendation. February 6, 2020, Committee on Education have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 14 be referred to Committee to hold the favorable recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 6, 2020, Committee on Education have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 81 be referred to Committee to hold the favorable recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 6, 2020, Committee on Education have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 123 be amended as follows. As amended be referred to Committee to hold the favorable recommendation placed on the consent calendar. February 6, 2020, Committee on Education have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 95 be amended as follows. As amended be referred to Committee on Appropriations with favorable recommendation. February 6, 2020, Committee on Education have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 1 be amended as follows. As amended be referred to Committee on Appropriations with a favorable recommendation. February 6, 2020, Committee on Finance have consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 50 be postponed indefinitely.
Consideration of resolutions. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Technically, we have a couple of other things before that, so we are going to proceed out of order in order to go to resolutions. So, Mr. President, I move that the Senate proceed out of order, consideration of resolutions.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The Senate will proceed out of order for consideration of resolutions. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, just a quick announcement and explanation of how things are going to go. To ensure that we have plenty of opportunity to speak to the various resolutions, because there are several, we are going to adopt each resolution first in order that they are on your calendar, and then we will hold discussion on those resolutions until after they are all adopted, and then senators can come to the well and speak to to any or all of them, rather than doing it one at a time as they're adopted. So we'll adopt all of them first, and then we'll save discussion until they are all adopted.
Consideration of resolutions. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 007?
Senate Joint Resolution 7 by Senators Story and Rankin, Representatives Quinteo and Geithner, concerning recognition of military veterans and MIA POW Appreciation Day.
Senator Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move Senate Joint Resolution 007. Ask that it be read at length.
Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Resolution 007 at length?
Senate Joint Resolution 7 by Senators Story and Rankin and Representatives Quinteo and Geithner, concerning recognition of military veterans and MIA POW Appreciation Day. Whereas Colorado has a proud and distinguished history of dedicated military service by men and women of this state whose courage, heroism, and sacrifice preserve the liberties and democratic way of life set forth in our state and federal constitutions. And whereas Colorado is home to a significant number of military installations, including Fort Carson, the United States Air Force Academy, Buckley Air Force Base, Peterson Air Force Base, Shriver Air Force Base, and Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Station that contribute not only to the national security of our nation, but to the economic health of our state. And whereas Colorado benefits significantly from the presence and military service of the more than 49,000 men and women in our state who serve in the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, the branch reserves, the Colorado National Guard, and the Civil Air Patrol. And whereas the men and women of the Colorado National Guard have served in defense of our nation and as the first military responders in support of civil authorities during domestic emergencies and are celebrating their 160th anniversary this year. And whereas in times of conflict around the globe, it is particularly appropriate to recognize the Coloradans in all branches and components of the armed services who serve around the world to protect the security and peace of our nation and other nations. And whereas, in addition to active members of the armed services, Colorado is the proud home of more than 400,000 military veterans who have served their country long and well and who bring great honor and distinction to the state. And whereas Colorado is home not only to active duty service personnel and veterans, but also to the countless family members of these men and women who display the same dedication, courage, and sacrifice. And whereas we should also never forget the sacrifices made for us by the 94 service members from Colorado declared missing in action or prisoners of war while defending the principles of liberty and justice in conflicts in Korea, Laos, and Vietnam. And whereas disparate and diverse groups of Coloradans, such as persons who are African American, Latino or Latina, Hispanic, in addition to men and women of all backgrounds, are bound together in the United States Armed Services by their selfless dedication to the spirit of our nation, the ideals of freedom and democracy, and the cause of democracy and stability around the globe. Now therefore be it resolved by the Senate of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, and the House of Representatives concurring herein, that we, the members of the 72nd General Assembly, hereby extend our heartfelt gratitude to our state's veterans, past and present, to all military men and women currently serving in the armed services, and to the family members of active duty personnel and veterans, and that we remember and honor those prisoners of war and those missing in action from previous conflicts. And that we express our continued partnership with and support of Fort Carson and maintain our strong commitment to supporting ongoing military training at the Mountain Post. And that we encourage the citizens of Colorado to join in the celebration of Colorado's military, veterans, and MIA POW Appreciation Day on February 7th, 2020, in recognition and honor of the thousands of fellow citizens in the military who protect and serve their communities, state, and country. Be it further resolved that copies of this joint resolution be sent to President Donald J. Trump, Governor Jared Polis, General John W. Raymond, Chief of Space Operations, United States Space Force, and Commander, United States Space Command, General Terrence D. O'Shaughnessy, Commander, North American Aerospace Defense Command, United States Northern Command, Lieutenant General J. B. Silveria, Superintendent, United States Air Force Academy, Major General Michael A. Lowe, Adjutant General of Colorado, Major General Matthew W. McFarlane, Commanding General, 4th Infantry Division in Fort Carson, Colonel Devin R. Pepper, commander of the 460th Space Wing, Buckley Air Force Base. Colonel James E. Smith, commander, 50th Space Wing, Air Force Base Command, Shriver Air Force Base. Colonel Thomas Falzarano, commander, 21st Space Wing, Peterson Air Force Base. Colonel Michael Cobb, commander, Pueblo Chemical Depot. The Colorado Board of Veterans Affairs, the United Veterans Committee of Colorado, the Mountain States Chapter, Paralyzed Veterans of America, the American Legion Department of Colorado, the Department of Colorado Veterans of Foreign Wars, the Broomfield Veterans Memorial Museum, the Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum, and each member of Colorado's congressional delegation.
The motion is the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 007. Are there any no votes? With 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Joint Resolution 007 is adopted. Co-sponsors, Senator Story.
Thank you, Mr. President. We ask that today's roll call be added as the co-sponsors, thank you, to this resolution.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 008.
Senate Joint Resolution 8 by Senators Williams and Fields and Representatives Buckner and Exum concerning recognition of African American veterans.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move SJR 008 and ask that it be read at length.
Mr. Carpenter, please read Resolution 008 at length.
Senate Joint Resolution 8 by Senators Williams and Fields and Representatives Buckner and Exum concerning recognition of African American veterans. Whereas the military history of African Americans spans from the arrival of the first enslaved Africans during the colonial history of the United States to the present day. And whereas African Americans have participated in every war fought by or within the United States, including the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, the Indian Wars, World Wars I and II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And whereas nearly 198,000 African American soldiers served during the Civil War, roughly 350,000 African American soldiers served during World War I, and another 1.25 million served during World War II, with many more African Americans serving in the years since World War II. And whereas on July 26, 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, integrating the military and mandating equality of treatment and opportunity for African American soldiers. And whereas desegregation of the military was not complete for several years, and all African American units persisted well into the Korean War. And whereas the last all African American unit was not disbanded until 1954. And whereas, until the Korean War, African American veterans were precluded from direct access to benefits from the Veterans Administration, which included VA housing loans, employment assistance, unemployment benefits, and health care. And whereas African Americans continue to serve in the United States military, providing exemplary service, duty, integrity, dedication, and commitment to our great nation. And whereas currently 17% of the United States Armed Forces are African American. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, and the House of Representatives concurring herein, that we, the General Assembly, in recognition of the heroic efforts and great sacrifice of African American veterans, hereby encourage this commemoration throughout the House and Senate. Be it further resolved that copies of this joint resolution be sent to the Congressional Black Caucus, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, the Retired Enlisted Association, the Tuskegee Airmen, the Colorado Black Women for Political Action, the National Association for Black Veterans Incorporated, the Colorado Veterans of Foreign Wars, the Colorado American Legion, the United Veterans Committee of Colorado, the Colorado Disabled American Veterans, and the Mountain States Chapter of the Paralyzed Veterans of America.
The motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 008. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Joint Resolution 008 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senator Phillips.
Mr. President, we ask that the current roll call be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors on Senate Joint Resolution 008. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 009?
Senate Joint Resolution 9 by Senators Garcia and Heising, Representatives Escar and Wilson, concerning the 52nd anniversary of the capture of the USS Pueblo by North Korea.
Senator Heisey.
Thank you, Mr. President, and my co-sponsor here. I move that Senate Joint Resolution SJR 8 be read at length.
Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Senate Joint Resolution 009 at length?
Senate Joint Resolution 9 by Senators Garcia and Heisey and Representatives Escar and Wilson, concerning the 52nd anniversary of the capture of the USS Pueblo by North Korea. Whereas the USS Pueblo was originally launched as a United States Army cargo ship in 1944, but was transferred to the United States Navy and renamed the USS Pueblo in 1966. And whereas the USS Pueblo was named for the city of Pueblo, Colorado, in the county of Pueblo, Colorado, and was the third ship in the naval fleet to bear the name Pueblo. And whereas, after leaving Japan in early January 1968 on an intelligence mission, the USS Pueblo was attacked by the North Korean military on January 23, 1968. And whereas, according to the United States naval authorities and the crew of the USS Pueblo, the ship was in international waters at the time of the attack. And whereas, one crew member of the USS Pueblo was killed during the attack, and 80 crew members and 2 civilian oceanographers were captured and held for 11 months by the North Korean government. And whereas this year marks the 52nd anniversary of North Korea's attack on the USS Pueblo and her crew. And whereas the USS Pueblo is still in commission in the United States Navy, but continues to be held by the North Korean government and is currently a museum in Pyongyang, North Korea. Now therefore be it resolved by the Senate of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the House of Representatives concurring herein, that we the members of the General Assembly recognize the bravery and sacrifice of the crew of the USS Pueblo, that we take pride in the fact that the USS Pueblo bears the name of a city and a county in Colorado, and therefore the citizens of Colorado should be aware of the incident that occurred with the USS Pueblo 52 years ago. That we continue the call for Kim Jong-un and the North Korean government to return the USS Pueblo to the people of the United States, and that we hereby designate January 23rd of each year as USS Pueblo Day, a day to remember and honor the brave crew of the USS Pueblo. Be it further resolved that copies of this joint resolution be sent to President Donald J. Trump, Governor Jared Polis, President pro tempore of the United States Senate Chuck Grassley, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi, and the members of Colorado's congressional delegation.
The motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 009. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Joint Resolution 009 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senator Heisey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the current roll call be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors on Senate Joint Resolution 009. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 010.
Senate Joint Resolution 10 by Senators Zenzinger and Marble and Representatives Sane and Valdez D. concerning honoring Gold Star families.
Senator Zenzinger.
I move Senate Joint Resolution 10 and ask that it be read at length.
Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Senate Joint Resolution 010 at length?
Senate Joint Resolution 10 by Senators Zenzinger and Marble and Representatives Sane and Valdez D. concerning honoring Gold Star families. Whereas, since the Revolutionary War, more than 1 million American soldiers have died in battle and military conflicts. Their families, who have endured these losses and the accompanying grief, are known as Gold Star families. And whereas, named for the practice of families hanging service banners in the windows of their homes with a star for each family member in the armed forces, deep blue stars were displayed for each living member serving, and they were replaced with gold if their loved one lost his or her life serving our country and protecting our freedom. And whereas, Grace Darling Siebold founded the American Gold Star Mothers in 1928, her son, George, was serving in World War I, and while he was abroad, she channeled her worry into visiting hospitalized veterans. When the letters from her son stopped arriving, and she learned of his death, she took action in her grief and with a group of mothers established American Gold Star Mothers Incorporated. And whereas, since 1936, Gold Star Mother's Day has been honored through presidential proclamation as the last Sunday of each September. And whereas, the acts of heroism and the stories of courage of each fallen soldier are forever remembered in the minds and hearts of their families. And whereas, while national monuments and memorials serve as strong visible reminders for the men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to our nation, Gold Star families are a living legacy of each fallen soldier and can help us all remember and honor these heroes by name. And whereas, long after the battles have ended, as our stars and stripes of liberty fly, the families who have at home a folded flag and an empty seat at the table deserve our respect and our support. Now therefore be it resolved by the Senate of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the House of Representatives concurring herein, that we, the members of the Colorado General Assembly, honor the pride and the pain of the parents and partners and children and siblings of our fallen heroes, and recognize the families of these proud patriots with an expression of profound gratitude and respect. Be it further resolved that copies of this joint resolution be sent to the commanders of the American Legion posts in Colorado, the commanders of the Veterans of Foreign Wars posts in Colorado, the commanders of Colorado's active military bases, the Pikes Peak chapter of Gold Star Mothers, the Denver chapter of Gold Star Wives, and the chapters of the Blue Star Mothers of Colorado.
The motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 010. Are there any no votes? With 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Joint Resolution 010 is adopted. Co-sponsors, Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. We request that the morning roll call be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 011.
Senate Joint Resolution 11 by Senators Donovan and Crowder and Representatives McLaughlin and Williams D. concerning the recognition and remembrance of military veterans in Colorado who served in the Vietnam War.
Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move SJ 11 and ask that it be read at length.
Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Resolution 001 at length?
Senate Joint Resolution 11 by Senators Donovan and Crowder and Representatives McLaughlin and Williams D. concerning the recognition and remembrance of military veterans in Colorado who served in the Vietnam War. Whereas, United States military involvement in the Vietnam War began in the Republic of South Vietnam in the 1950s and continued until 1975, involving North Vietnamese regular forces and Viet Cong guerrilla forces in armed conflict with United States Armed Forces and the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. And whereas, during this period, more than 2,700,000 American soldiers, both volunteers and draftees, served tours of duty in Vietnam, with a total of more than 9 million active duty military personnel, in what was an extremely long, difficult, and complex war. And whereas, more than 58,220 members of the United States Armed Forces, including 623 Coloradans, lost their lives in Vietnam, and more than 300,000 members of the United States Armed Forces were wounded. And whereas, in addition, more than 2,500 members of the United States Armed Forces were listed as prisoners of war or missing in action, including 41 Coloradans, 24 of whom remain unaccounted for. And whereas, according to the Denver Regional Office of the Federal Department of Veteran Affairs, as of 2014, an estimated 7 million members of the United States Armed Forces who served their country during the Vietnam era are still alive today, including more than 120,000 Coloradans. And whereas, on January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, which required the release of all United States POWs held in North Vietnam and the withdrawal of all United States Armed Forces from South Vietnam. And whereas, the United States Armed Forces completed the withdrawal of combat units and combat support units from South Vietnam by March 30th, 1973. And whereas, on April 30th, 1975, North Vietnamese regular forces captured Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, marking the official end of the Vietnam War. And whereas, as American military personnel completed their tours of duty in Vietnam, they returned home to a citizenry that was divided in its opinions of that conflict, and many people failed to distinguish their political and philosophical viewpoints towards the war from the individuals who had served. And whereas, in the intervening decades, our citizenry has come to understand more clearly the importance of recognizing and respecting the service of military veterans, regardless of any other opinions or issues. And whereas, the need for a formal recognition of the return of veterans from the Vietnam War is as important now as ever, not only for those veterans who served, but for all citizens. And whereas April 30th, 2020, marks the 45th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. Now therefore be it resolved by the Senate of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the House of Representatives concurring herein, that we the members of the Colorado General Assembly hereby honor the services and sacrifices of the military veterans in Colorado who served in Vietnam, including the South Vietnamese soldiers who served alongside American troops. Recognize the particular challenges faced by many of these veterans, both while serving in Vietnam and upon returning home. Express our appreciation for their fortitude, their activism on behalf of fellow veterans, their steadfast patriotism, their many accomplishments and contributions, and the leadership that they have shown to their families, community, organizations, and the state. And encourage all Coloradans to remember the sacrifices made by Vietnam veterans. Be it further resolved that copies of this joint resolution be sent to the Colorado Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, the United Veterans Committee of Colorado, Project Sanctuary, the United States Vietnamese American Volunteers Alliance, the President of the United States Donald J. Trump, the Honorable Jared Polis, Governor of Colorado, and the Colorado Congressional Delegation.
The motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 011. Are there any no votes? With 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Joint Resolution 011 is adopted. Co-sponsors, Senator Crowder.
Mr. President, I request that the current roll call be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 012?
Senate Joint Resolution 12 by Senators Todd and Gardner and Representatives Weissman and Carver, concerning honoring Colorado veterans on the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move Senate Joint Resolution 12 and request that it be read at length.
Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Senate Joint Resolution 012 at length?
Senate Joint Resolution 12 by Senators Todd and Gardner and Representatives Weissman and Carver, concerning honoring Colorado veterans on the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. Whereas, during the years 1941 to 1945, some 250,000 of Colorado's sons and daughters served in World War II, and of that number, over 3,500 were killed in action or from wounds suffered on the battlefield. And whereas, of the 3,586 Coloradans who gave the last full measure of devotion, offering their lives so that others might live freely, over half never came home, their remains unrecovered or buried in American military cemeteries around the world. And whereas, the state of Colorado has a rich history of service in World War II as a home of the famed 10th Mountain Division, which trained in the Colorado Rockies at Camp Hale on Tennessee Pass, and the Colorado National Guard's 157th Infantry Regiment, which spent 511 days in continuous combat during World War II, including 4 amphibious landings. Under the command of Captain Felix Sparks, the 157th Infantry Regiment liberated the Dachau concentration camp. Members of both units from Colorado are honored on the Colorado Freedom Memorial in Aurora. Whereas, the Colorado Freedom Memorial, dedicated in 2013, honors all Colorado veterans killed in action since the Spanish-American War, and all 3,586 of those killed in World War II are included, making the Colorado Freedom Memorial the only memorial in Colorado to honor all of our fallen, by name, in one place. And whereas, the Colorado Freedom Memorial will pay tribute to the men and women of Colorado who served in World War II, those who gave all and those who returned home to build Colorado into the beautiful state it is today, with a special ceremony dedicated to the greatest generation. Now therefore be it resolved by the Senate of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the House of Representatives concurring herein, that we, the General Assembly, in recognition of the heroic efforts and great sacrifice of World War II veterans from Colorado and across the United States, hereby recognize this commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II as Colorado's official ceremony and encourage support throughout the House and Senate.
The motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 012. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Joint Resolution 012 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I move that the current roll call be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors on Senate Joint Resolution 012. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 013.
Senate Joint Resolution 13 by Senators Bridges and Lundeen and Representatives Holtorf and Michelson-Janay, concerning recognition of military personnel from Colorado who have served around the world in the ongoing war against terrorism and honoring those who have died while serving the cause of freedom.
Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move Senate Joint Resolution 13 and ask that it be read at length.
Mr. Carpenter, please read Senate Joint Resolution 13 at length.
Senate Joint Resolution 13 by Senators Bridges and Lundeen and Representatives Holtorf and Michelson-Janay, concerning recognition of military personnel from Colorado who have served around the world in the ongoing war against terrorism and honoring those who have died while serving the cause of freedom. Whereas thousands of military personnel from Colorado have served around the world in the ongoing war against terrorism, including troops based at Fort Carson, the United States Air Force Academy, Peterson Air Force Base, and Buckley Air Force Base, members of the Colorado National Guard, Army Reserve, and Marine Corps Reserve, and troops from Colorado who are deployed with military units based in other states. And whereas on March 22nd, 2019, Sergeant First Class Will D. Lindsay, 33, of Cortez, Colorado, a member of the United States Army, assigned to 2nd Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group Airborne, based at Fort Carson, Colorado, made the ultimate sacrifice while serving his country in Operation Freedom Sentinel. And whereas, on March 22nd, 2019, Sergeant Joseph P. Collette, 29, of Lancaster, Ohio, a member of the United States Army assigned to the 242nd Ordnance Battalion, 71st Explosive Ordnance Disposal Group, based at Fort Carson, Colorado, made the ultimate sacrifice while serving his country in Operation Freedom Sentinel. And whereas, on June 25th, 2019, Master Sergeant Michael B. Riley, 32, of Heilbronn, Germany, a member of the United States Army assigned to 2nd Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group Airborne, based at Fort Carson, Colorado, made the ultimate sacrifice while serving his country in Operation Freedom Sentinel. And whereas, on June 30th, 2019, Sergeant First Class Elliot J. Robbins, 31, of Ogden, Utah, a member of the United States Army assigned to 10th Special Forces Group Airborne, based at Fort Carson, Colorado, made the ultimate sacrifice while serving his country in Operation Freedom Sentinel. And whereas, on July 13th, 2019, Sergeant Major James G. Ryan Sarter, 40, of Teague, Texas, a member of the United States Army assigned to 2nd Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group Airborne, based at Fort Carson, Colorado, made the ultimate sacrifice while serving his country in Operation Freedom Sentinel. Now therefore, be it resolved by the Senate of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the House of Representatives concurring herein, that we, the members of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, remember and honor these and all Coloradans who have given their lives in service to their country, express our sympathy to the families and friends of those service members who have died, and honor the service, dedication, and valor of all military personnel from Colorado who have served and are currently serving in military operations around the world.
The motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 013. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 3 excused, Senate Joint Resolution 013 is adopted. Senator Lundin.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I beg leave for a few very brief comments before asking for the co-sponsors. Thank you, Mr. President. It is fitting that this final resolution that we worked through today speaks to the fact that we have an historical tradition of the military protecting the rights of debate and consideration of liberty as we do here. It's fitting that this particular resolution be the last resolution because it's an acknowledgement that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance and continues through today. I've just returned from the House, where the House passed a resolution naming a stretch of Highway 24 in memory of one of these modern-day heroes. I could continue to speak, but let me read to you the words of the widow, Dee Sarter, and what she posted on Facebook as she invited people to come to the House chamber today. Dee said, "Tomorrow is the anniversary of the day we said goodbye to Ryan and sent him on his last deployment." She wrote these words on behalf of herself and her 3 children, Garrett, Grace, and Strider. "Those words," Dee says, "haunt me now. I didn't know it would be our last hug, our last kiss, or the last time he would hold his children. As awful as it is, at the same time he left and stepped onto that plane, we will be on the floor of the Colorado House of Representatives. If you'd like to watch tomorrow, please do so." A resolution sponsored by Representative Geithner and Senator Lundin will rename a portion of Highway 24 the Sergeant Major James Gregory Ryan Sarter Memorial Hospital. Mr. President, I ask that the current roll call be added as sponsors, co-sponsors of this resolution.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors on Senate Joint Resolution 013. Guests and members, please remain standing for taps to be played by Staff Sergeant Lance Christensen from the Colorado National Guard of the 101st Army Band. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we suspend Senate Rule 31A to allow current representatives to speak to the resolutions from the well of the Senate.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes having the motion is adopted. Is there any discussion on any of the resolutions presented? Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Today, we want to take the time to honor and remember the sacrifices of the servicemen and women on this day in February. My colleague from Arapahoe County and I are proud to sponsor Resolution 008, on recognizing African Americans and their contributions to our country. As many of you know, today and this month is Black History Month, and I want to take a moment to recognize and honor the contributions of our servicemen and our women who've made their contributions to our country. The veterans and the active members in this room do not need to be reminded of these contributions. African Americans have been serving in wars even before we could call this country the United States of America. And I'm encouraged by the stories that I hear of an unparalleled bond between our service members of all races and all backgrounds. But the history service members of colors has not always been petty to the honor of their sacrifices, without being honest about some unique challenges that African Americans have faced. It would be a dishonor to service them members everywhere. Admiral Michelle Howard served simultaneously as the former commander of the U.S. Naval Forces in Europe, in the U.S. Forces in Africa, and she was a commander of the Allied Joint Force Command in Naples. She also happens to be an African-American woman who served her country. And when she asked about what Black History Month means to her, she said that by taking the time to educate ourselves about our history and the people who shaped this nation, we can fully more appreciate the ideas that are set down by the founders. It is a reminder that our work is to sustain freedom and to ensure that the rights and the liberty belongs to all of our citizens. This is what that day is and every day is all about, honoring and working together to ensure the rights and the liberties belong to every person. Our own U.S. Sergeant, Air Force of Desert Storm, Leanne Wheeler. She served in Desert Storm. She was the first NCO of the quarter for her unit, and being the first in service and still in the newly elected areas. So we thank her for her service to our country. During the American Revolutionary War, we had a dozen Black Marines serve before the United States implemented 140 years of segregationist and discriminatory policies. Black service members have had to wage wars against our enemies abroad and against discriminatory practices simultaneously. But I'm proud to say that today I can count 15 naval warships that are named after African Americans. I can see the highways, I can see the public events, and we can honor the sacrifices of our Black veterans like the Tuskegee Airmen. I can see the first recognition in this building in which we serve, where 2 years ago, a piece of artwork was dedicated and painted by one of our Tuskegee Airmen, and it now hangs permanently in this building on the 3rd floor. So I want to thank you and thank everyone for your sacrifices at home and abroad. Thank you for carrying the legacy of the brave women and the brave men who fought for equality in all aspects of our society.
Senator Fields is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues, and guests. I also want to thank my colleague from Denver, who is also the co-sponsor of the Senate Joint Resolution 008, which recognizes the contribution of African American veterans. I have 4 simple words, maybe 8. And those words are, you fought for us and you served for us. And the older I get, the more I recognize and appreciate those who wear the uniform. The women that wear the uniform. The men that wear the uniform. Those who are serving now, and those who are just retired veterans. You fought for us, and you served for us. My dad was a soldier, which makes me a daughter of a soldier. My dad served in the Army for 30 years, 1 tour in Korea and 2 tours in Vietnam. My mom never wore the uniform, and she never really got any medals. But she served alongside my dad, and she fought back loneliness to ensure a happy home for me and also celebrating my dad's return. So when I think about service and sacrifice, I think about so many other people who didn't make it home. Some veterans and military personnel are missing in action. Some were captured, some were tortured, and some came home with disabilities. My mom and dad are no longer on this earth today. They're resting in heaven. So I really will never ever know the scars and the sacrifice of military service. But I do know that my dad died from complications of being exposed to Agent Orange. Ultimately, he died from pancreatic cancer. And I believe that my mom died shortly after that from a broken heart. My dad told me often, well, not often, but I would say the last couple of months of his life, that he was proud to serve this country. He was proud to fight for this country. But his greatest regret was that he was not able to save his grandson. So I appreciate all of you and for all the many levels of service. Many of you have fought for us. Some of you are continuing to serve for us. So it's moments like this I'm reminded of the value of freedom, the value of sacrifice, and the value of service, and the value of what you've done to protect us for our liberties. For this, I am so very grateful. So for everyone that's here today, I just want to say, welcome home. And I pray for the safe return for those who are in active duty today.
Representative Buckner, followed by Representative Exum.
Thank you. What an honor for me to speak for the first time on the Senate floor. Thank you. And also, it's an honor to recognize African American veterans. African American veterans have participated in every major United States war since colonial times. A few of the most recognizable units in which they served are the Buffalo Soldiers. This nickname was given to the Black Cavalry by Native American tribes who fought in the Indian Wars. The Buffalo Soldiers originated as the Army's 10th Cavalry Regiment and served in the Spanish-American War, World War I, and the Italian campaign of World War II. The 369th Infantry Regiment, also known as the Harlem Hellfighters, said to have never lost a man to capture or a foot of ground while they were on the front line. The Montford Point Marines, who received basic training in a segregated boot camp, and the Tuskegee Airmen, a World War II African-American aviation group whose story has been brought to light through books, in Hollywood, and on the small screen. For many veterans, serving in the military meant pushing past their own physical and mental limits in order to defeat the enemy. Many African American veterans also had to contend with and break through the limits placed upon them by society. Whether they fought stateside or overseas, in integrated or segregated units, or during World War II, Korea, or Vietnam, the African American veterans persisted past prejudice to serve their country with honor. We salute our African American veterans who overcame racial and gender barriers and went through the ranks to enjoy successful military and civilian careers. And since I have several family members who are no longer with me but served our country valiantly, I would like to speak their names today. Uncle James William Todd, Uncle John Samuel Todd, Uncle Raymond Todd, Reverend Edward Buckner, Cousin William Buckner, and my father-in-law, Robert G. Buckner. Their stories of their bravery and struggles will always remain with me, and I will never forget their amazing stories. So all of you who are here in this chamber today, who are veterans, we appreciate you. We know what you have gone through and sacrificed for our country. Thank you.
Representative Exum, followed by Senator Story.
Thank you, Mr. President. African Americans have served in our military from the very beginning of American history, from the thousands of black soldiers, both slaves and well as free, from all the 13 colonies who fought in the Continental Army during the Americans' War for the independence from Great Britain, and many who are also served in the state militias. To the black sailors forced to work on the ships as substitutes for their white masters. To Private Howard P. Perry, the first African American to enlist in the U.S. Marines in 1942. To the Tuskegee Airmen, the first black pilots in the U.S. Air Force in 1943. To Robert Henry Lawrence, Jr., the first African American astronaut who died while training in December 1967. To Colonel Gideon Buford, United States Air Force, the first African American astronaut to go into space in August 1983. To now more than 356,000 African Americans active duty and reserve military members, being 17% of all our total military force. And right now, black women outnumber black men in every branch of our military, and in the Army 2-to-1. These American heroes deserve our recognition and our thanks. God bless you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Story.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, my esteemed colleagues in the Colorado Senate Chamber. On this day, Military Appreciation Day, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome our illustrious guests this morning to the chamber of the Colorado Senate, our military service members, active duty, reservists, retired, and veterans. Please rise so that we may recognize you. And would the family members of military service members, current and former, rise with them. Thank you so much for your commitment and dedication to your country and to all of us. You may be seated. Thank you. Today is a day near and dear to my heart. I grew up in a military family, as my father was a career Army officer and a decorated pilot. He flew helicopters in Korea and Vietnam. I think in depth about both my family and close friends. I think of the brave souls that joyfully demonstrate their commitment to service, as well as those members who exemplify all too well the associated risks. Your presence in the Capitol today is a tribute to those individuals and families who have risked and sometimes lost parents, siblings, and children to the tribulations of military commitment. All around the country today, the familiar black and white flag flies high. It is not only a symbol of our POW and MIA community, it is a reminder of our sacred commitment to never forget or leave our fallen heroes behind. Right now is an opportunity for all of us to express our gratitude, our admiration, and our support to the men and women who have answered that noble call of service. From the soldiers who shivered and starved through the winter at Valley Forge, to the doughboys dug into the muddy trenches of the Western Front, to the platoon who patrolled hazy jungles of Vietnam, and the young men or women deployed to the mountains of Afghanistan. We remember and honor them all. So today and every day, let's take the time to show our support and respect for our service members, reservists, military families, and veterans who keep this nation strong and safe. To every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, guardsman, MIA, POW, who proudly served in the armed forces of the United States of America with a great degree of sincerity and humility, I simply say thank you. Thank you for all you have done and continue to do for our families, our communities, and our beloved nation.
Sarah Heisey, followed by Sarah Heisey, followed by Representative Buentello.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, you don't serve in El Paso County for now going on 14 years without developing a deep appreciation for the members that are currently in uniform and the veterans that are there. I've had the opportunity to have several of those bases in my district and still currently do. But I'd like to drill down a little bit and talk about one person, a sailor that I never met. He was the one that lost his life on the USS Pueblo. His name was Dwayne Hodges. He grew up in the little town that I grew up in, less than 1,000 people at the time, a little older than I was, but after the Pueblo incident, his father built a memorial in the front yard of his home, put a flag out there, put a light on it so that flag was flying 24 hours a day. You never passed in front of the Hodges home without remembering why that was there. A little later, after the incident was over, Captain Butcher came to town, met with Mr. Hodges, but then we had an assembly at the school. And the one thing I remember out of that assembly was the captains telling us that never again, when the Star-Spangled Banner is played, will he stand there silently in respect. He will sing the words every single time. And I actually had the opportunity to see him on TV one time during the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner, and he obviously was singing the words. So thank you to all of the veterans, to all of the active duty military that serve so we can have this way of life.
Representative Buentello.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members of this body, for joining us for Military Appreciation Day. It's my honor as the representative from the Home of Heroes, along with Representative Escar, who is also a representative from the Home of Heroes, to present this resolution honoring our veterans, as well as those who are prisoners of war and missing in action. Pueblo has a long, proud tradition of service and valor. My own family has been proud to serve for 4 generations, from my great-grandfather serving in World War I, Private First Class Carl Gunther, to my husband, Captain Nicholas Henriksen, who has served in Operation Iraqi Freedom only a few years ago. I struggle to find the words to properly thank and recognize my hometown Pueblo and this proud tradition. I believe the words are best summed up by President Dwight Eisenhower, who commented, "What is it, something in the water or something out there in Pueblo? All these guys turn out to be heroes." I'm very proud to be related to so many heroes. Our beautiful convention center has a plaza honoring Drew Dix, William Crawford, Carl Sitter, Raymond Jerry Murphy, all of whom received the Medal of Honor. I believe our history in Pueblo speaks for itself, and it is my honor to thank all of our Colorado veterans, and especially those in Pueblo and in the Arkansas Valley and in the mountains of Canyon City for their service, as well as their families for their sacrifice enduring years on end without our family members. Equally important to stating our own gratitude to those who have served is remembrance to those who went missing in action or became prisoners of war. Pueblo County has 7 such veterans who have never been accounted for. And I say their names because I believe it's important that we continue to remember them long after they're gone. John A. LaVue, Bruce C. Walker, Lester A. Hansen, Thomas A. Haffrey, Jack E. Laffey, William Paffenroth, and Joseph Gonzalez. I thank each and every one of these men for their service, and I thank their families for their sacrifice. Thank you to Colorado troops for their service.
Representative Escar, followed by Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Mr. Senate President. This is the 6th year now I've spoke about the USS Pueblo, and some people have asked me what's the big deal about that ship. The fact that it's named after Pueblo, who is the home of heroes. We are the home of heroes because we have 4 Medal of Honor recipients from our town. William Crawford served in the Army during World War II. Carl Sitter, the Marines during the Korean War. Raymond G. or Jerry Murphy, Marines from the Korean War. Andrew Dix from the Army, Vietnam. Dwight D. Eisenhower did come to Pueblo, but when he was giving Jerry Murphy his Medal of Honor, he did say, "What is it about the water? What is it about it? Something in the water out there in Pueblo? All of you guys turn out to be heroes." So when we talk about the USS Pueblo and the significance of why every year we run the resolution asking for the return of the USS Pueblo ship from North Korea, is because we have deep roots. I don't have to tell you that. Any of you who know any of us who were born and raised in Pueblo know how deep our roots are. I don't think we ever talk about it. We ask every year for help from our federal friends to try to bring that ship back to Pueblo. I think we would even settle with just bringing it back to the USA. They hold on to it and use it as a museum in North Korea. They use it, and they have used it for years, as propaganda. That ship belongs to the men who served on it and the one who didn't survive. It belongs back here, and so until that ship does come home, yeah, we're going to talk about the USS Pueblo on Military Appreciation Day. It is a ship, but it's a ship with so much meaning. So thank you, colleagues, for hearing it once again. Appreciate your patience and your understanding. To all of the veterans who are here today and your families, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your service. My grandfather served in the Army, my other grandfather served in the Army, and my brother-in-law served in the Army. I've had numerous friends who have served, even the ones standing behind me. Thank you to all of you from the bottom of our hearts. We appreciate you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Representative Valdez, followed by Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Senator President Leroy Garcia. Thank you for your service, for your dedication to our great nation, to our state, and to our community, and to the city of Pueblo. Thank you, members, for allowing me to speak here today on your Senate floor. It is truly an honor to be here, to speak to our men and women in the military on Veterans Day. My father served in Korea, along with his brothers and his sisters. My stepson served two tours in Afghanistan. My son-in-law serves today and just returned home in December, but will be traveling on another tour. I have cousins, Miguel Valdez right now, who's serving overseas. But I'm here today to honor the men and women of our military, those who are currently serving, whether it be our air, land, or water, but also recognizing those who have served, our African American, our Latinos, our Asian Americans. Just recently, last week, we lost a Navajo code talker, Joe Vanderveer Sr., that we lowered the flags half-staff. And we continue to advocate for the USS Pueblo. And I ask our governor and our president and Kim Jong-un to honor and bring back the USS Pueblo to the city of Pueblo so that we can honor the men and women who served on the USS Pueblo. It's truly an honor to be a sponsor for the Gold family. Why? Because their spouses prayed for their return safely. They wrote letters every single day for their support. And my prayers and thoughts are with them. But we are here to honor all men and women in the military. And I thank you, thank our men and women in the military, and thank each and every one who is here today. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Garcia.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a real honor to be able to speak on behalf of the Gold Star families in Senate Joint Resolution 10. It is said that those who serve do not serve alone. For many Colorado families, a loved one's service ended in sacrifice. And it is these families' shared service and shared sacrifice that we honor today. We cannot heal their grief or restore their loss. We cannot repay the debt we owe them. We can only remember these mothers and fathers, wives, husbands, fathers, children, and families, as they keep alive the memories of their Colorado's heroes. Since 9/11, more than 23,000 troops, both in and out of combat, have been lost in the line of duty. And they have left behind a legacy of invaluable service, but each was invaluable and needed back home. Every loss left behind an unimaginable hole in the hearts of their families. And it is this darkness that we wish to make golden, that we wish we could brighten with Colorado's love for parents who face the unimaginable. For it is their golden spirit that has brightened our lives, that has protected us, and proved the highest path that shows the truth of the ultimate sacrifice. Our Gold Star family's resolution today honors them, and we know that it is inadequate to the task. If you would like to help us take it one step further forward, we invite you to support the USO in the Dignified Transfer Program at Dover, to participate in the events of Gold Star remembrance organizations across Colorado, or simply in a moment of respectful reflection on Memorial Day or on the last Sunday in September as our nation observes Gold Star Mother's Day. And finally, if you are a Gold Star family member here today, please know that you have our deepest appreciation and most profound sympathy. Thank you.
Senator Marble is recognized, followed by Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, honored guests who gather with us today. It is an honor to present this resolution to you, honoring the first among our American families, the Gold Star families, who have endured what can only be described as an unimaginable to the rest of us. That knock at the door from a military casualty assistance officer to deliver the news that their son, daughter, husband, or wife is not coming home. I would like to read in part a speech given in 2010 by Marine General John F. Kelly, who became our Director of Homeland Security. General Kelly said, "Those with less of a sense of service to the nation never understand it when men and women of character step forward to look danger and adversity straight in the eye, refusing to blink or give ground even to their own deaths," Kelly said. The protected can't begin to understand the price paid so they and their families can sleep safe and free at night. No, they are not victims, but are warriors. Your warriors. And warriors are never victims, regardless of how and where they fall. Death or fear of death has no power over them. Their paths are paved by sacrifice, sacrifices they gladly make for you. If anyone thinks you can somehow thank them for their service and not support the cause for which they fight, America's survival, then they are lying to themselves and rationalizing away something in their lives, Kelly said. But more importantly, they are slighting our warriors and mocking their commitment to the nation. General Kelly gave this remarkable and pointed speech 4 days after his 29-year-old son, Marine First Lieutenant Robert Michael Kelly, was killed instantly after he stepped on a landmine while leading a patrol in southern Afghanistan. My son was there. The men and women who gave their last breath in battle are the best of us. Their dedication to this purpose and duty was more important than life itself, and their self-sacrifice has not only made this nation possible, but possible to purchase freedom from another generation of Americans. And our Gold Star mothers and fathers have seeded their generational dream, a future with grandchildren, great-grandchildren, so the rest of us will not live in fear of a knock at the door. Gold Star families have endured the unimaginable so that America can endure. Our Gold Star families are the American cornerstone for our future, which is the bedrock of a nation, and we extend our heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of them. Day is done, gone the sun, from the lake, from the hill, from the sky. All is well, safely rest. God is nigh. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. And thank you, Mr. President.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate and the House, let me expound on a few words that our General Kelly said, former Director of Homeland Security and of the Southern Command. He is a Gold Star father. Kelly has recounted the emotional journey each Gold Star family undergoes, beginning with the dreaded knock at the door from the military casualty assistance officer. The minute the door opens and a family member sees him framed in the doorway, they know. They know without a word being uttered. And the grief is unexpectedly physical, unbearable to the mind, and agonizing to the heart. Families must then wait as the military completes the formal process and sends the remains of their loved ones home from the battlefield. And through all this, and forever, the pain of loss endures. In the midst of sadness, General Kelly says Gold Star families can be proud of their loved ones' service and sacrifice. Proud that this is the one very personal decision to serve a cause higher than themselves, regardless of the outcome to them personally. Their fallen one gave an answer to two questions that over the centuries have defined the dedication of free and righteous men and women in the fight against wickedness. If not me, who? If not now, when? I drafted this resolution in 2016 because I noticed something missing. And I hope this tradition of honoring Gold Star families continues long after we leave our service here. There is no greater love than someone laying down their life for another. When our military servicemen and women lay down their lives for the service of our country, they are laying down their lives for all of us, a debt that can never be repaid. And a reminder in even our most divisive times that our cherished freedom isn't free, that it is bought with the blood sacrifice of Colorado's sons and daughters, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers. But we can honor their families for the sacrifice that they have endured for our country, and remember and reflect on the stories of their loved ones. And today is not allotted enough time for folks wishing to give their full measure of devotion. Therefore, the House of Representatives will also host the Gold Star Family Resolution on a special day of the Gold Star family's choosing, as we have done in years past, and you're welcome to join us. For it is not the lofty mountains nor the fruited plains that make us free. It is those who have sacrificed and endured. Our greatest Colorado treasure is our Gold Star families. Thank you.
Senator Crowder, followed by Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. President, and to my fellow veterans, active, inactive, reserves, hoo-yah! You know, I think I will tell you that I always look forward to this. This will be my last talk on Military Appreciation Day since I'm term limited, but it's always been a pleasure to talk about the military. You know, I wear on my lapel a flag and a cross. God and country, that flag, and every one of you. That's why we serve. Do we sacrifice? We have beliefs in serving the country. That's what we do. You know, I'm going to speak on Joint Resolution 11, which has the Vietnam War. I am a Vietnam veteran. And actually, I think realistically, I'll probably be the last Vietnam veteran that serves in the state legislation due to my age. Although I'm only 40, I got it. But, you know, it was quite an experience, but I think the resolution did not quite cover everything I'd like to, you know, talk to you about. It briefly talks about the Paris Peace Accord in '73. That, in reality, that's the day that we won the war in Vietnam, you know, when we agreed to pull out. What happened after that, it's kind of an amazing story, because what we do, we have history, and that history is perceived a little bit differently by a lot of people. You know, the reality is what happened after '73, that peace accord. Congress of the United States of America actually voted to defund the Vietnam War. We had a 1-to-1. If they lost a helicopter, we would replace it. If the South Vietnamese shot a bullet, we would replace it. What happened is actually the Congress defunded it, so therefore all of the supplies to South Vietnam was lost due to the Congress, and then it fell in '75. But the reality is the peace accord was the end of the war, and we come out victorious on that war. And a lot of times for those who served in Vietnam, I will tell you that it's almost a rare occurrence to see the enemy. And that's what every war is a little bit different, you know, but that was Vietnam. That's where we come up with the term guerrilla warfare. But it's rare to see the enemy. So it was an interesting part of our time. You know, I will give you just a few facts about it. You heard about the facts of the amount of people served there. But, you know, there was 88 of the men who served in Vietnam were Caucasian, 10% were black, and 1% were other races. The reality on, you know, I know there's been talk up here on different races, but we served as one. We did not serve races, we served as one America. We served as one military unit, whether it be Army, Air Force, Navy, what, you know, but we were unified. And I think that we owe a lot to the military for actually the integration of this country, because that was one of the first experiments that happened on integration. And it was a very successful endeavor. You know, we got along great over there. And I've spoken about that before. There was not really the separation that is perceived. And that's what I'm talking about history. When history talks about, you know, the way that we perceived, we were not isolated amongst each other, we were one. So it was you know, I think that's where our social programs start there. And it's really been a very productive and, you know, it pulls us together. But, you know, veterans are, they're special. Now, I'm not going to talk to you about how we were treated when we come back. There's a stark reality. Our families were proud of us for what we did. You know, and that's what was really important. The country perceived us as being an unpopular war, but myself, as well as a lot of other like-minded veterans, got together and perceived that this would never happen to the next veterans. And I think we were very successful at that. And it was important that we respect our veterans who come home. We wear a uniform. We go where we're told. We do not pick and choose our wars or where we're at in the world. So the next time you think of something that is unpopular or whatever, you know, do not condemn the veteran for being there, you know. And if you think, here's one thing I hope the veterans of that era will understand. If you think the social unrest and the demonstrations now are something, you should have seen it in the 60s. You know, it was, if you could survive the 60s of demonstrations, you could survive anything. Right now, you have people running around with masks on their face. Back then, everybody wanted people to know what they're demonstrating. And it's just a different world today. But I think it was, I'm not saying which time is better, I'm just saying it was different. But to my fellow veterans, I want you to enjoy your day. And always remember that I always look forward to this day, even though I'm not here. But two things you always want to do. You want to always hire the veteran and always vote for the veteran. Thank you very much. Yeah, no applauding, no applauding. This guy up here will throw you out.
Right, true. Thank you, Senator Crawford.
Thank you.
Reminding him. No applause in the Senate, please. Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Crowder. I'm speaking to the Vietnam vets here today because I have a place in my heart for Vietnam veterans. My husband, former State Representative Mike McLaughlin, was a Marine corporal in Vietnam between 1966 and 1967. He was the only survivor of a plane crash at one time, and he walked out, went to a bar, completely stunned, and people came in and said, "What happened?" He goes, "I have no idea what happened." He rolled out of the plane, and he soon discovered that everybody else on that plane had died that day. We did go to the Vietnam Wall, and he could find, he kind of knew everybody by their nicknames, you know, Red and Sparky and all that stuff. But he could look up on this wall and find every one of the men that he'd served with on that airplane. So this is a real special day for me to celebrate Vietnam veterans. He fought in Da Nang, and Phu Bai, Cam Lo, and Camp J.J. Carroll, and I could not be prouder of his service. Vietnam does have a sad history, but the people who fought there and gave their lives there did so with the best of intentions. And though they defended America's freedom, they were treated poorly when they came home. We need to continue to appreciate the service and sacrifice of our Vietnam veterans, and I want to personally thank all of you. Thank you.
Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues and guests, for accommodating Mother Nature and making time in what can often feel like a frantic pace in this building to pause and thank military past and present and the families that support them. I come in front of you today with just a heart full of gratitude. This is always a special day in the building, and to be quite frank, I always kind of forget how special it is until I wade into it once again. I have a heart full of gratitude for the 120,000 Coloradans that are alive today who served in Vietnam, some who join us on the floor. I have a heart full of gratitude to the families who supported the country while their loved ones serve or fight abroad, and then support their loved ones when they return. I have a heart full of gratitude for my grandfather, William Bird Mounsey, who never let me call him grandfather because he thought it was too old. So I grew up with not a grandfather, I grew up with a Bill. Bill was trained in Camp Hale. Now, if you combine the stories of the Army and the stories of an Irish family, we're not too sure the truthfulness of those two combining in family legends. But family legend does go that he gave the first order at Camp Hale, which was to fall out. Not much of an order, but the first order nonetheless. He then said, after he was one of the few officers that they could find at that time who had any sort of winter training experience. So he was brought to Camp Hale to train all the soldiers that were in the 10th Mountain Division. You had a choice of two sizes of skis when you walked to Camp Hale, long or really long. And the first soldiers that got there got the long ones, and soldiers that got there second got the really long ones. And what he said was, in the infinite wisdom of the Army, he was sent from the winter warfare of Camp Hale to fight in the Pacific Theater. And he started in Australia, and Japan was his destination. He was the one who taught me the meaning of snafu and foobar. I knew those probably at a much younger age than my parents probably would have approved, but he thought it was quite funny. We shared the same birthday, October 17th. We were 60 years apart, and it might have been the fact that we both had blue eyes and no one else in our family did. Or perhaps it was just the fate of sharing the same birthday, but we were cut from the same cloth, and I was attached to him by the hip from as early as I can remember. So not only did he teach a young girl what foobar meant, but he also taught me the singular value of serving your country. He also taught me that when you're in a foxhole with a soldier, you don't care who that soldier loves or the color of their skin. I come here with a heart full of gratitude for our Gold Star families, for reminding us constantly of the sacrifice our country is built upon. To my mother and grandmother that moved on a moment's notice in the support of the Army, that resulted in 13 schools in 12 years. I have a heart full of gratitude today for the military bases across Colorado who keep our military strong. To our African American veterans who served our country often better than our country served them. I have a heart full of gratitude today to the Vietnam vets who, long after the capture of Saigon, bore the conflict of a nation on their shoulders and whose persistence of service has created a better culture of soldier support for all those who came after them. I have a heart full of gratitude to the 10th Mountain Division, past and present, for their impact on me and for all of Colorado and this great nation. Finally, I have a particularly heart full of gratitude today for the colleagues that not only serve this great state as senators and as representatives, but who also served our nation in the military. Climb to glory.
Representative Wiseman, followed by Representative Michaelson today.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the chance to come to the Senate today to be part of talking about SJR 12, which is about the Second World War and the Colorado Freedom Memorial. You know, as we heard earlier when the resolution was read, this was the war to end all wars. It was the war that gave us the greatest generation. And I think, you know, as a country, we've made a lot of sacrifices, and certainly our servicemen and women have made a lot of sacrifices since then. But I think collectively we as a country have not had to endure anything like what we endured back then, and I think for that we should be very grateful. And yet with the passage of time, I fear that we risk losing that knowledge, we risk losing that memory. I think maybe as few as 2% of the 16 million who served in some way in World War II are with us today. I think fewer than 400,000 veterans from that era remain. Both of my grandfathers and a great uncle served in World War II in different ways. And I was lucky I got to talk a little bit with them about what that meant at those points in their lives. But now with the benefit of 20 or 30 years more of hindsight, I think I wish I had asked more questions, I had absorbed more. So I think part of how we honor the ongoing sacrifice of those who served in World War II is to ask, is to learn, is to become carriers of that experience and memory ourselves. If those who served are willing to talk. I think that part of honoring that also means respecting when somebody may not want to talk about something they experienced and honoring that choice that a veteran may make. And I really appreciate that with this resolution, we are also acknowledging the Colorado Freedom Memorial and the rather exceptional site that is and story that is. I think some members here may have had the occasion to visit. The Freedom Memorial is actually in the district that I represent, House District 36, located about 8th and Telluride, just north of the North Gate to Buckley Air Force Base. On days when the roads are not quite as bad as they are out there now, you could get there from here in about 35 minutes. Just to say it's not too long a trip, and it's one worth making if you haven't already. You can visit by day or by night. All of the glass panels that make up the memorial are illuminated from within, and it's really a pretty beautiful place to stop and reflect. And the memorial it's a private work. We're used to public memorials, but this was the project fundamentally of one person. And Mr. President, if I may, I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Crandall, who's here today, if you wouldn't mind. What's fitting is this year is the 20th anniversary of when I think the thought process and the work and the fundraising and the effort and the design and the construction began when Mr. Crandall was visiting Normandy, and that sparked the idea. And as you've read in the resolution, what this site does is pulls together the names of all service members who have ever given their life in the line of duty in Colorado in any conflict going back to statehood. It's a pretty exceptional thing, and that includes those who have served in World War II. So thank you, sir, for the work that you've done to remember those who have given the ultimate sacrifice for our country, and thank you again, everyone here who has served or is now serving. Thank you, Mr. President.
Representative Michaelson Schnee.
Thank you, Mr. President, and what an honor to address you all here in this august chamber, my first time standing in the well of the Senate. And I'm not here today to talk to you about my grandfather and my uncles and my aunt who served in World War II, or my father who served in the Vietnam era, or my husband who served in Operation Desert Freedom, or Iraqi Freedom. I've got it wrong. Desert Storm, thank you, in Operation Desert Storm. But I want to talk to you about a young man who came into my life when he was about 12 years old. His name is Ryan Janae. He's my stepson. And this interim, around Christmas time, I got to spend some time at Camp Pendleton with him and his beautiful, loving wife and my brand new grandbaby, Evelyn Grace Janae. Ryan is a Staff Sergeant Select. He has Staff Select status, so he will become a Staff Sergeant very shortly, God willing, in the United States Marine Corps, where he is right now stationed at Camp Pendleton. And when Ryan was 12 and I first met him, he was absolutely obsessed with the Navy SEALs. He was sure he was going to be a Navy SEAL. His father served in the Air Force, as I shared with you. His mother also served in the Air Force. And military service wasn't a question. He was going to serve in the military, and it wasn't going to be the Air Force. But he was certain he was going to be a Navy SEAL. Well, Ryan was not an easy child, let's just say. I don't know how many Marines were easy children. I think that that's a fair thing to say. And one day, we got called into Ryan's school because he had done some things that just, well, they weren't just right. And his father is, all angry, and I'm frustrated. What do we do? I have never had a child of this age, and I don't know what to do. And then I had an idea. I knew from teaching at Metro State University of Denver that there was a very large establishment of recruiters. And I thought, I'm going to bring this boy in front of the Navy recruiter and tell this Navy recruiter exactly what we heard in his high school, and have the Navy recruiter say, well, we're not going to have you in the Navy if you do that sort of thing. And I thought, this is surefire way it's going to work. So I went. We were in 2 separate cars. Ryan was in the car with his dad. I was in the front car. I was going to get to Metro before Dad got to Metro. I get there, Navy recruiter is closed. So I go downstairs, and the Marine recruiter was open. And I walk in, and there's a staff sergeant there, about 6'6" in fatigues. And I said, look, I have a problem. I have a kid in the car whose dream is to become a Navy SEAL, but he's getting in trouble in school, and I need some help. And he said, I got you. I got you. So I called Dad, and we're all set, and Dad brings Ryan in. And Ryan's no idea why he's being brought to Metro, because he's made it very clear to us he's never going to college. So why is he on a college campus? He has no idea. Dad walks him into the Marine recruiters, and out comes this, I wish I could remember his name right now, out comes this tall staff sergeant, and he says, here, you want to join the military. Is that right, son? Ryan's like, yes. And he said, you look up here and you say, sir. And Ryan looks up, yes, sir, sir, yes, sir. And he sits down with Ryan, and he starts telling him, it's not easy to join the military, whatever branch it is that you're going to join, and here's what you're going to do. You're going to start working out with me and my Marines. And that's what Ryan did. He went and he worked out with those Marines every single time they met at Wash Park. And he still was a really tough child, but he made it. He pre-enlisted like his dad pre-enlisted. He made it. And they followed him. They followed his success, and they said, we're trusting you. You cannot let us down. And he has taken this like a mantle. He has just re-enlisted for his 3rd time. And he is about to be a staff sergeant, and he has made me a grandmother. So all of you who sit here before us, who have served our nation, like my family has served our nation, I am so grateful to you. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you for everything you have given us. Thank you for teaching us what it means to serve. My daughter was so impressed by her stepbrother that she joined Army JROTC when she was in high school, because that's what it means to serve in our family. And I am grateful, though I have not served in the way that you have served, that I have the opportunity to honor you here. Thank you for your service.
Representative Holtorf.
No button. Thank you. Thank you, sir. My message is one that I've given on the House floor, and it's already been spoken here. When you serve in the military and you deploy to a combat zone, service knows no color. It doesn't matter if you're African American, Asian American, Irish American, Hispanic American. It doesn't matter. You become something better than yourself. And I urge all of us to take that step in our country to have that same consideration. Let us all be Americans and serve the United States of America. as we serve in the military. When I deployed to Afghanistan on 2 different occasions, I saw this firsthand. And those of us who have served in combat zones in the past on this esteemed floor have already mentioned that. I have a celebration today, and my celebration is this. It starts with our heroes of the past. I'm a member, lifetime member of American Legion, Post 66. For you American Legion members, I salute you. I'm also the past post commander of 8064. And for your VFW members, and I see you out there, I salute you. For the veterans of Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, the global war on terrorism, which will not end in my lifetime, I salute you. But I thank God every day that we have men and women who will wear that uniform. I look in the audience and I see you. You are warriors because you, as those of us in the past, have raised your hand and made an allegiance to the United States Constitution. Now, in my family legacy, we have a piece of paper. Our great-great-grandfather came through Ellis Island from Germany, and he renounced his allegiance to Kaiser Wilhelm II, and he swore his allegiance to the United States Constitution, the greatest nation on earth. Let us never forget that. Thank God for you warriors, those of you who have sworn under oath to make that ultimate sacrifice voluntarily. And I have a further message. For those of us that have children, I have 5. Military service is difficult. There's many things in this great country you can do besides raise your right hand and put your life on the line to serve God and country. But for those of you that have children, I will tell you, take the message home to your districts, to this state, and say, military service is a proud and honorable endeavor. And if you feel inclined, please raise your right hand for the future of this great nation to defend our democratic republic and the United States Constitution. Probably the most profound and historic document ever written in the history of this earth. So I go forward with pride, and I salute everyone past and present who will take this message of encouraging military service, of defending the great state of Colorado, of defending the great nation of the United States of America. Because we are all Americans first. Thank you, and God bless America.
Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to everyone in the gallery and to our viewing audience. I want to take a moment to speak specifically to our viewing audience because that's where I believe many of our World War II veterans probably are, that they are perhaps in some of our veteran homes around the state of Colorado. And I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to you and to your families. I want to say thank you not only for serving, but standing strong. Unfortunately, we had a very snowy day today, and that made it very difficult for people to be able to come and actually be present here at the Capitol. But my hope is that you are able to feel the love that has been expressed by so many different people today, right here in the Senate chambers. I joined my colleague from Alamos, and from his sentiments of saying this is his final year of being here for Military Day. This is the final of 16 years. I have celebrated Military Day 8 years in the House and now 8 years in the Senate, and it is always my favorite day. The reason it is my most favorite day is that we come together, we express gratitude, we express praise for our great country and for the service of so many. And so this is my final chance to speak on Military Day, and I promise I will be succinct. Most importantly, I think one of the things that I have learned over the years of serving in the legislature is how important it is to recognize what has brought us to the point we are today. The freedom that we express, the opportunity to have the glorious American flag flown wherever, the fact that we are able to speak freely. Sometimes that's very uncomfortable and people don't feel good about that freedom of speech, but because we're Americans, we do have it. And what we have to do is recognize that importance of how people fought for that freedom. And when I think about the 75th anniversary of the ending of World War II, it's easy for me to recognize because it was 75 years ago that my sister was born, and my father was in Africa, and he read about her birth in the Stars and Stripes newspaper. It wasn't that they had a phone. It wasn't that they had an opportunity to have social media. It was about getting either a telegram or reading it in the newspaper. And so when you think about all of our veterans from World War II, and you think about how they went without communication from their families, they went without being able to go and pick up a phone and say, hello, congratulations, any kind of message, any kind of comfort of communication, that was not made available. And so when we look at our World War II veterans and we look at how they come back and tell their stories, and we're finding fewer and fewer, just like our Holocaust survivors, we're finding fewer and fewer who are still living. It is so important that we know their story, we know the history, and we know the importance of what they fought for and how many of them lost their lives and did not come back to the United States, but are buried on foreign country. That relationship that we have with our foreign countries is so important today because of the history. So when we look back, we continue to look forward. I want to say a special thank you to my husband, because he really has been my teacher of understanding the role of military. I too am a child of the 60s. I remember those protests. I remember and didn't participate, but I do remember many of the things that were done and said, and for our Vietnam vets, how shameful it was in terms of the way we did not welcome them back home. But I do remember that. And I think one of the things that I have learned from my husband, who is a retired colonel in the Army, is how important it is to not just think about how the military serves us, but how important it is that we recognize the impact of defense of our country. How important it is that when we look at all of the different branches, and we do know and understand all branches are not the same. And so when we say military, some people think that means everybody's alike. And we know that Marine standing behind me, and our Army and Navy and Marines and Air Force and Coast Guard and Merchant Marines, each one serves a different purpose, and it's important that we know and understand. And it is very important that we know and understand how to teach our children. The Colorado Freedom Memorial that is in Aurora, I invite all of you to come out and see and spend time. It is a pensive place to be, because you see not only names, but you see memories, and you see people who have sacrificed their lives. It was a vision, it was a dream by one couple. And they went to work, and I know we can't introduce them on the floor, but the creator of the Colorado Freedom Memorial was introduced by my friend from the House earlier. I encourage you to come to Aurora. Come out and visit. Look at the different memorials that are around our state. Go up to the 10th Mountain Division. Oh my goodness, the history that is right here in Colorado. Teach our children, teach our grandchildren the importance of defense of a nation. Teach them the love of country, the devotion, the thankfulness of those of you who served. It's an honor to serve with those of you that served in the military and now are serving in the Colorado legislature. I appreciate your service, and I appreciate being able to be here and say, once again, thank you And to my friends in the Veterans Home and their families, thank you. God bless you.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President, and it has been a privilege to bring the resolution recognizing our veterans of World War II on the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. So I thank the senator from Aurora for her participation all of these years of my time. I grew up in a household where World War II was called the war. There have been wars before and wars since, but for someone of my generation, the children of our generation, the senator from Aurora and I, the war was World War II. My father, perhaps inexplicably, enlisted in the Navy in 1939 to leave the farm. My mother's brothers, all of my uncles, were drafted during the war. And I just wanted to give many of you who perhaps did not have that experience or maybe did not have a father or a grandfather, a mother or grandmother who lived through those years, a sense of the scope of the war and what it meant to what has been properly referred to as the greatest generation. You know, in 1945, the population of the United States was about 140 million. Of our American population, 16 million men and women served in uniform. That is 1 in every 10 Americans. And if you take out the children and you take out the older folks, what that means for an age, what's referred to as an age cohort of about 17 to 35 or 40, that means 2 and 3 and 4 of everyone in that age group was in uniform. From the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, to the collapse of Germany on May 8th, 1945, and then the surrender of the Japanese in Tokyo Bay on September 2nd of that year, 407,000 Americans lost their lives. Many, many, many of those killed in combat, others killed in training accidents, because those of you who serve in the military know that training for war is itself a very dangerous activity. Others died in death camps. As the senator from Aurora talked about veterans and their stories, if you have a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor, anyone you know who served in World War II or was close to others that served in the war, I encourage you, before we lose them, to speak with them and see if they'll share their story. My father's story was a story of a 17-year-old kid who left a farm in South Texas and over the next 6 years found himself around the world. A lucky survivor, because the other stories that you learn in military service is whether in your service you're wounded or lose your life, whether you find yourself in harm's way or not, gets decided on some desk somewhere far from you, or just the chances of history. Such was the case of all of the sailors and soldiers in my family, although not their friends and families' friends. I remember a poignant story that was told to me by my mother when I must have been no more than 5 or 6 years. We were in the cemetery and we walked by a particular family plot, and she said to me, this is where a particular young man, a family friend, was buried. He died in Normandy. And she said, you know, families had a choice in World War II to have their loved one interred overseas or to incur a long, long wait to have the body returned. And she said, you know, the Henry family decided that they would have their son returned, and a lot of people said at the time, you know, you don't know for sure. They do the best they can on the battlefield. You don't know if that's your son. And she said, you know, Ms. Henry said, it's someone's son, and I'll care for someone's son. And that stuck with me for 6 decades. The senator from Alamosa talked about history and how people have a lot of versions of history. I want to be brief, so I'm not going to read each and every major battle of World War II, but if you don't know some of these names and the sacrifices that were made and the balance of what this world would be was decided there. Midway, the Battle of the Aleutians, the North African Campaign, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Anzio, D-Day, Saipan. On a day like today, I can never sort of trudge my way through the snow, to be quite honest with you, and not think of the Battle of the Bulge. Because if you don't know what 19-year-old kids can endure when they take that oath, read about it. I can't imagine it today. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, all to what's known as VE Day and VJ Day. And there's a lot of revisionist history, if you will, about how the war ended in the Pacific and whether or not President Truman's decision to use the atomic bomb was right or wrong. I'll tell you that my fathers and my uncles never had any doubt about that. Their world was different than ours. They sacrificed so that we would have a world different than theirs. And the world that we have today, everything we know about it, and for the most part, peace, interrupted by isolated wars in comparison, just as much sacrifice, but not wars in which 1 in every 10 Americans is in uniform, was decided there. Let me give you one more World War II battle date. November 1st, 1945. Oh, but the war was over on September 2nd. November 1st, 1945 was the planned invasion day for Americans to invade Japan and meet what was 500,000 of the enemy on the beaches there. Because of American resolve, American soldiers, sailors, and airmen, men and women, those families who stayed home, waited, accepted rationing, entered into what was a total war for the freedom of the world. That day did not happen. Colleagues, I often don't speak at length on this day, but it is the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. If you know any of those veterans, any of their families, anyone who sent a veteran to war in that time, before you lose them, visit with them, learn their story. It is our history of what this country is and what our nation is and what our nation can be, what our nation is to the world. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, thank you for your time and your words this morning. We will conclude the portion of the morning where we're inviting the House sponsors of these resolutions to speak. We will be doing one last thing, and then I think the House has concluded their floor work for the day, so obviously members are free to stick around, but I think we will be opening it up to senators that were not sponsors of the resolutions to say a few words if they would like. But first, we do have one quick thing that we want to take care of before recessing, greeting our guests, and then returning back for senators to speak. And that is that we want to make an amendment to one of the resolutions that was adopted, Senate Joint Resolution 13. And so I will be making a motion to reconsider and allowing for a moment for that amendment to be made, and then we'll remove that resolution. So that's what's about to happen here. Mr. President, I, having voted on the prevailing side, I move for the reconsideration of Senate Joint Resolution 13.
The motion before the body is the reconsideration of Senate Joint Resolution 13. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The motion is adopted and reconsideration is granted.
I think he has to move the...
Consideration of resolutions. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 13?
Senate Joint Resolution 13 by Senators Bridges and Lundin and Representatives Holtorf and Michelson-Janay, concerning recognition of military personnel from Colorado who have served around the world in the ongoing war against terrorism and honoring those who have died while serving the cause of freedom.
Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. I remove Senate Joint Resolution 13.
Is there any discussion? Senator Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move L001 and ask that it be read at length.
There's an amendment at the desk. Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Amendment L001?
Amendment L001 to Senate Joint Resolution 13 by Senator Quorum. Amend printed resolution, page 2, strike line 23 and substitute an Operation Freedom Sentinel. And whereas on August 11th, 2019, Gunnery Sergeant Scott A. Copenhaver of Mancos, Colorado, a member of the United States Marine Corps assigned to the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion, Marine Forces Special Operations Command, based at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, made the ultimate sacrifice while serving his country in Operation Inherent Resolve. Now, therefore.
Senator Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's ironic that...
Senator Quorum, will you please move the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move L001.
To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's rather ironic that we're moving this amendment for Scott, who lost his life in Iraq last year. Scott was a man among men, and I have some photos if you ever wish to look. He may be the most intimidating person I've ever met. Scott is a relative. And, you know, he gave his all. He was one of the most honorable people from the most honorable family that I think you would ever know. And he was the second soldier lost in Montezuma County last year. And So I just wanted to add this amendment to add Scott to this tribute, and may he never be forgotten.
Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. We do our best to not make mistakes around here, but we also do our best when we make those mistakes to admit them, correct them, and do our best to honor those that were here today. None of the mistakes that we make in this chamber will result in any of our names being added to the list. What we can learn from the people who have made the last full measure of devotion is to put aside our differences, to reach across the aisle. There's no Democrat or Republican in the foxhole. The sacrifices made by the people we're honoring I think we need to do our best to make sure that those who've given the last full measure of devotion did not do so in vain. And so I renew my motion for the passage of Senate Joint Resolution 13.
Is there further discussion on Amendment L001? Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was at this funeral, and I'd like to explain to you what happened. You know, they had an entire detachment of Marines from Camp Lejeune come to Colorado to perform the services. And when I talk about a contingent, there must have been probably 15 Marines from there. The honor for this military man was amazing, you know, and I was really appreciative to the United States Marine Corps for what they did to this individual, or for this individual, not to. But he was, I did not know him personally, but I had ties to the man. We were just over at the Manco School to give the dedication for it, and that's where this young man was from. So it was very, very impressive. You know, but I will tell you that they had a picture of him even though you don't know somebody, you get an idea of what they're like. And this, they had one when he was in full battle gear out in the desert, and he had the most becoming smile of anybody you ever seen. And it was really a tragedy to lose this young man. But I wanted to thank the Marines, and I'd like to thank the community of Montrose for what they did. The turnout was tremendous. You know, but I was very impressed by that Marine contingency, and with that, Mr. President, I support this resolution.
Having no further discussion on Amendment L001, are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Amendment L001 is adopted. To the resolution, Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the current roll call be added as co-sponsors. Oh, that was the amendment. My bad.
To the resolution, repassage. Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. I remove Senate Joint Resolution 13.
The motion before the body is the readoption of Senate Joint Resolution 0013. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Joint Resolution 013 is readopted. Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the current roll call be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors. Members and guests, the Senate will stand in a brief recess to welcome and visit with our guests.
want me to explain what we're doing?
Yeah. Do you want us to explain? The Senate will come back to order. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, we are now going to essentially just open up the floor to folks who want to speak about the resolutions that were not sponsors, and then we'll be laying over the third reading bill, but we will be moving into the one bill that's on the second reading of bill's consent calendar, and then we should be done. But for now, we will open it up to senators who want to say a couple of brief words about the resolutions that we approved this morning.
Mr. Carpenter, please excuse Senator Smallwood and Senator Marble. Senator Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. President, and we always look forward to this day. I think it's one of the greatest things we do here, and I am so appreciative. We're all affected by this. My Uncle Everett, who I never had the opportunity to meet because he was serving with General Patton, and my bucket list says I'm going to go visit him at his grave in Europe. Died on Christmas Day just prior to the end of the war. But my father-in-law is 89, maybe 90, Korean War veteran, and sharp as a tack. Very honored to have him in my life. One of my heroes in life, Nick Gray, Navy, Pearl Harbor, there on the original day, 2 tours of Guadalcanal. Toughest man I ever met in my life. Unfortunately, last spring, a little after his 100th birthday, he went to check the cattle and came off the horse and did not survive the injuries. Did the previous thing at 95. Was left out and went to check the cattle again up at Cimarron, 29 miles east of Montrose, and didn't come back. They started looking for him about 9 o'clock, and they found him and they hauled him to the hospital. He had taken his shirt off to try to make a flag for somebody to see out in the meadows, and never happened, so he rolled it up and made himself a pillow. That was the 5th of June. They hauled him off to the hospital and said, Mr. Gray, you're 95 years old, you have a weak heart, 4 broken ribs, a broken pelvis, and a broken hip. And there's not much we can do for you. And I'm going, this is just an example of that tough generation. Nick said, no, you're not. I'm going home. I'm going home. And that he did. I happened to be in an event on the 19th of August, about 70 days later, if you figure the days up. My brother called me, and he was going to the high country. And he said, knew where he was going. He said, "You never guess what I saw today." And I said, well, elk are common, bear are common, and moose are rare. I believe you saw a moose today. He said, no, I saw Nick Gray horseback moving cattle. And that's the generation that we have lost. But we have a new generation out there that we need to honor and respect. And many of you I have served with since 2011. Not many that I think about, but there's a few in the room that I've served at 2011. And you may notice that every Friday I am dressed in red. Now, why am I dressed in red every Friday? Because I had a family friend who was serving in Iraq in the Marine Corps, and they all signed a letter asking me to honor and respect what they do by wearing red each and every Friday. I've done it. Now I'm going to ask you to join me in honoring our young men and women serving us in the military, no matter where they serve, to think of them, honor them, and wear red on Friday. Thank you.
Senator Priola.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I too want to rise in support of all of our veterans, men and women that have served this country before we were a country. I enjoy reading about history just to pass time, especially on vacations, laying by the pool, and one of the books I especially appreciate was 1776, I think by McCullum or whatever. But learned a lot that you don't learn in school about the Battle of Boston and the Battle of New York and so on and so forth. Here's a fact that the British amphibious landing at New York in 1777, I believe, was the largest amphibious landing not to reoccur until D-Day. That shows you the kind of capital and manpower that the Crown brought to North America to try to quash the rebellion. And I think we should also keep in mind how science has played a role in the saving of American lives and the protection of American freedom throughout the decades and the centuries. We all know about the Manhattan Project that came to fruition in the state south of us, New Mexico. But also, the policy decision we're going to be working on this session was a part of our founding with the Revolutionary War. In 1777, George Washington, as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, determined that his troops would be inoculated against smallpox. Smallpox significantly affected troops who fought for the British as well. George Washington's decision to inoculate the Continental Army contributed to the Americans' independence from the British. The men and women who have fought for this country have also had to deal with the elements. So fast forward to the Spanish-American War. During the Spanish-American War, more American soldiers died from yellow fever, malaria, and other diseases than from combat. The Army created the Yellow Fever Commission that was led by Surgeon Major Walter Reed. If that name sounds familiar, I believe there's a hospital in D.C. named after him. Maryland, close to D.C., kind of. The Commission's work eventually helped contribute to the development of the 17D vaccine against yellow fever, a vaccine that is still used today. Again, I rise in support of all the resolutions and all the men and women that have fought for our freedom. Thank you.
Senator Janal.
Thank you, Madam President. And I want to thank all of you that are here today with us in this chamber that have served in all branches of the military. I thank you all for your service. My dad was in World War II, U.S. Navy, South Pacific, USS Mount Olympus. Uncles in World War II, Army, one in North Africa, one on the in the European theater. Two brothers in the Army in the 60s. I don't know much about their service, but one thing I do know is I was about 6 years old at the time, so I do remember waving goodbye at Logan Airport while they boarded a plane, both of them going at the same time, somewhere in Germany. My mother crying. I also, myself, joined Air Force ROTC. My freshman year in college, in the 70s, in the early 70s. I say this because, you know, I caved to this. I dropped out. And that's one of the regrets I've always had. Because when I walked across the campus in my uniform at 17 or I think 17, maybe 18, I was spit at, I was called names, and I couldn't really deal with that. And I wish I had been a stronger person at that time. So, but I want to bring us to the future, to something that's very real to me right now. I want to talk about a friend, an Army sergeant that's been sitting next to me all morning, that we paid tribute to yesterday, who is leaving in a day or two to be deployed to Afghanistan. It's hit me harder than any of those other examples I gave you about my family members. I've known Loren for about a decade, and I'm very proud of him and what he's accomplished, Sergeant Loren Collins. And I didn't think it would affect me as it is happening right now. Yesterday, his parents were here, and other members of his family and friends. And when we were talking today about all of these different times in our history and all of the different branches of the military, I really, it hit me hard that that Loren is being deployed, and that I just have never had these feelings. Probably because I haven't been this age and I haven't had all the time to think about these things. But I want to say that his mother wrote me a very long letter because I told her what I was going to do at Military Day. And his mother is an awesome, she wrote me like 2 pages, very small print, very, single-spaced. And I'm not going to read the whole letter. But I think I share her feelings being Loren's friend. But this is from Loren's mother in regards to how she feels about her son being deployed. And I think it's really true. She says, quote, "I cannot know what the future holds, but I feel that I must trust in God and stay strong in order to support Loren and his fellow soldiers. Easier said than done. Each of us have challenges in life that we balance the odds with faith, grace, and the grit in order to heal, preserve, and overcome adversity, or at least that has been my experience. St. Michael, Archangel, was a warrior angel of God and is the patron saint of not only police officers, but also soldiers. He has always been there to guide me and help me personally and professionally, so I entrust my son to his guardianship. Claudia Pemberton also quoted as saying that America without her soldiers would be like God without his angels. And so I ask for your collective prayers for America's angels and the peace that should prevail." Unquote. God bless you all, and thank you for this time.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank everyone here this afternoon for all of the work that they have done, all of the sacrifices that they have made, all of the sacrifices that their families have made. And I want to thank everyone who's joined us here today. I want to specifically acknowledge my 2 guests who have joined us today. Terry L. Clinton, past department commander at the American Legion. Please rise. And I also want to acknowledge David Daniel Ortiz, Chief Warrant Officer 2, retired, Senior Vice Commander and Program Director at VFW Post 1. And I want to acknowledge VFW Post 1. They're both very involved with Post 1. And Post 1 was founded in 1899, and their very first meeting was held here at the Colorado State Capitol, and is actually the first VFW post in the world. And it's located now in the heart of my Senate District, Senate District 34, right on Santa Fe Drive. Part of what I love about this work is the way in which I'm able to learn something new every day. And I just want to acknowledge everyone who's shared stories, who's shared history, and who's shared their personal connections as to why we are so appreciative to all the veterans who have served our country so well. And so I just want to appreciate each and every one of you. And as I close, I just also want to acknowledge my family members who have served. My grandfather, Pedro Antonio Gonzalez, my dad, Mario Gonzalez, my uncles, Frank Rodriguez, Max Rodriguez, my cousins, Nicole Rodriguez and Martin Rodriguez, and my cousins who are currently serving our country now, Benjamin Roy Rodriguez and John B. Rodriguez as well. Thank you for the work and the service that you have offered to our country. Thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam President. Members and guests, it's an honor and privilege to stand before you today to recognize the 400,000 veterans of Colorado, including the 100,000 veterans that live in Pikes Peak. I represent a good number of those, and I'm thus standing in support of all the resolutions, but for reasons which will become apparent, in particular the Senate Joint Resolution 12. It is literally and factually true that without the service and sacrifice of the veterans, we would not be standing before you today. In times of existential threats to our existence as a nation, you, the veterans, have stepped up, and for that we are eternally grateful, and we honor you today. My parents were both part of the greatest generation. They served in the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor of the CIA, my mother in Washington, and my father as a paratrooper in Burma, now Myanmar, flying over the hump to Kunming in China. When I was in the House, as here in the Senate, we heard a lot about resolutions and tributes, including this one annually. They were inspiring, they were touching, they were heartfelt, and deeply important to recognize and shine a light on organizations and people. At the end of some of those resolutions in the House, a representative whose name cannot now be mentioned since I'm in the Senate, but he's very tall and he lives in Salida, he would say, "You have heard the resolution, so now what are you going to do about it?" In 2014, Governor Hickenlooper made a commitment to make Colorado the most veteran-friendly state in the nation. So, in response to our honored colleague from Salida, this is some of what we have done to fulfill Governor Hickenlooper's commitment. We passed the Uniform Military and Overseas Voter Act 11-12-19 to ensure that our military members serving overseas have ballots that are actually counted when they are mailed from remote locations. We sponsored Senate Bill 15-1290, House Bill 15-1294 to ensure that veterans get the lowest tuition available from our state colleges and universities so that they can continue their education. We've worked to obtain funding for peer navigators for the National Model Veteran Trauma Court in Colorado Springs and in other jurisdictions around the state. We sponsored House Bill 16-1267, the Veteran Service to Career Pilot Program, and its successor, House Bill 18-1343, to address the disproportionate veteran unemployment rate by providing jobs, DOL qualified apprenticeships, and transition assistance to veterans and their qualified dependents at one-stop shops like the Mount Carmel Center of Excellence in Colorado Springs, and through the Volunteers of America in Denver and another vet service center in Grand Junction. This year, along with Representative Snyder and Representative Carver, we're sponsoring a bill to evaluate the needs and feasibility of establishing a long-term care facility for veterans in El Paso County to address the needs of a growing and aging veteran population. We have provided free hunting and fishing permits, raised the pay of workers at veteran community living centers, provided expedited licensure for military spouses moving for other states, and enacted veteran hiring preferences. This is what we have done for the veterans in Colorado and much more. So today, I thank you veterans and your families and my family for your service. We in the Colorado legislature are striving to do our part to make Colorado your welcoming, appreciative, and supportive home. I rise in support of the resolutions.
Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. Thank you, colleagues. I'm not going to repeat a lot of the things that have been said today, but I agree with everything. The kind words of gratitude and the recognition for each and every veteran who served our nation and our state. And the gratitude that I have personally for my family members and my community members and my friends. You know, there's no way that I could possibly begin to say it in words what it means to me. So I'm not going to try. Plus, all of you have done such a great job already, and we've been here for a few hours. But in all seriousness, I say sometimes I don't know how I could possibly thank the veterans for what they've done and the current military personnel for what they're doing, but this is actually what we have. It's not a break in work today on the Senate floor. It's taking time as part of our really, really, really important work. I'm one of a few people in the entire state that serve in this chamber every day. And so to say that we've stopped work to acknowledge your service, I think is inaccurate. We're acknowledging your service as part of what we do in the 4 months that we spend in this chamber, and it's really important to me. So this is the tool that I have, and so I'm proud to say that the Senate is taking time to have Military Appreciation Day, and this is the one thing that I can do publicly to thank our veterans, and so we're doing that collectively. I'm very humbled to stand here today with you and so many veterans who have left, but I hope that they felt the gratitude in the room and the personal stories told, so that we're acknowledging their service and their contributions, because it's actually not about me today, it's about you. So for those who are left in the room, I really would like you to take a moment and stand and be recognized, because you have my personal gratitude, and I know collectively as the Senate, you're the reason that we're doing this today. And for those of you who are senators who have served, please stand again and be recognized, just so that we can collectively thank you. And I'll pay the fine, sir, madam, but we're going to clap for these folks. Thank you. And again, if I get a fine, I'm happy to pay it, but there were 2 folks that came with me today from my district who have also been there for me personally, and I wanted to invite them to join us today as part of the ceremonies. And so Jim Engelking, please stand. This is James F. Engelking, Lieutenant Commander in the United States Navy Reserves. Thank you so much for your service and for everything you've done for me. And I'd like you to stand, Carl, please. This is Carl Ham, Specialist 4th Class, United States Army, Vietnam veteran and Purple Heart recipient. And I'd also like to add, even though Jim didn't write it down, Vietnam veteran. These folks are pillars in our community, and you have my gratitude, and thank you for the support. Thank you all.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam President. Members and guests, thank you so much for your comments here today. Mr. President, I want to thank you specifically, also Majority Leader. This is
kind of a rare occasion that we would hold Military Appreciation Day here in the Senate chamber rather over in the House. And I do remember one year, a few years ago, I may have still been in the House, when we spoke so long that an honored veteran passed out in the back of the chamber, and we have to have EMTs come and revive him. So thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Majority Leader, the members who contributed to reformatting Military Appreciation Day, and I hope that the members of the military who are here, current veterans, whoever, family members, those who have lost, Gold Star families, those who are about to be deployed, I hope that we in the General Assembly have honored you in this new format, and if you have any feedback for us, I'd love to hear it. Mr. President, thank you again for your leadership on this, and thank you, members.
Third reading of bills. Mr. Carpenter, please. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to lay over Senate Bill 93, which is the only bill on third reading of bills, final passage, to Monday, February 10th, 2020. Not quite.
The motion is to lay over Senate Bill 93 until February 10th. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and Senate Bill 93 will be laid over until February 10th and retain its place on the calendar. General order, second reading of bills. Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole for consideration of General Order, second reading of bills, consent calendar.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted, and the Senate resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole for the consideration of General Order, second reading of bills, consent calendar, and the Minority Leader will take the chair.
The committee will come to order. The Colt rule is not relaxed. Mr. Carpenter, would you please read the title of all the bill listed on the second reading of bills consent calendar?
Senate Bill 152 by Senators Zinzinger and Woodward and Representative Valdez D. Concerning correction of the effective date clause of Senate Bill 19-263 for the purpose of ensuring that the bill accomplishes its intended legal effect of eliminating the requirement that the state treasurer execute lease purchase agreements to fund transportation projects during the 2020-21 and 2021-22 state fiscal years of a refer ballot issue that authorizes the state to issue transportation revenue anticipation notes as approved at the 2020 general election.
Does anyone need that read again? No. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move for the adoption of the one bill on the consent calendar, which includes Senate Bill 152.
The motion is to approve all of the bill listed on the second reading of bills consent calendar. Is there any discussion on any of the bill listed on the consent calendar? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Bill 152 on second reading consent. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is adopted. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
The motion is for the committee to rise and report. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Sorry, Mr. Majority Leader. The committee will rise and report.
The Senate will come to order. Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee has met and had a number of bill under consideration. Would the reader please read the report?
Mr. President, your committee will begs lead reports that in consideration of the following test bills being second reading of makes following recommendations on Senate Bill 152 to pass second reading of aggressive place count for the reading upon passage.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just take a few hours to talk about this. I move adoption of the report.
The motion is for the adoption of the committee of the whole report. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 30 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 5 excused, the committee of the whole report is adopted. Senate Bill 152 passed on second reading and ordered engrossed place on the calendar for third reading and final passage. Members, we're going to proceed out of order a little bit to keep the minority leader from ushering himself away so that we can assemble the Capitol Choir so that we can sing happy birthday to the minority leader. Capitol Choir, please convene.
There's
Should I grab Dominic?
He's not going anywhere. Well, he's gone too.
Hey.
Mr. President. Happy birthday to you. One of these keys. Happy birthday to you, Mr. Minority Leader. Happy birthday, Mr. Minority Leader. Happy birthday to you.
Message from the House.
The House is adopted and transmits here with House Joint Resolution 1003 is printed in the House Journal, February 7th, 2020.
Announcements. Senator Cook.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to introduce somebody that I am very, very proud of. My stepdaughter, Lizzie. She is active she's in the Army Reserves, and she's a specialist, and she is being deployed to Kuwait next Thursday. And very proud of her. She joined when obviously it's all volunteer, and she felt the call to duty and volunteered, and she's actually going to be graduating from Texas Tech while she's in Kuwait. And so again, extremely proud of her. So.
Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to request a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you. I want to congratulate the Colorado State Senate. We did something that I don't believe has ever been done before, and that is we hosted Military Day right here in the Colorado State Senate. And I want to congratulate each and every one of you for being present, being actively involved, bringing forth, and I know it was a snowy day, so many of the guests that perhaps people had invited weren't able to come, but it was handled, I think, with dignity, with respect. I would hope that from this day forward, that next year when you, whether we host in the Senate or in the House, that we replicate some of the patterns that we set in place this year. And I'm very proud to have been a part of it for the last 16 years, and again, I want to say congratulations. And along with that, I know many of you already know, but I want to introduce my husband, the support behind me, Terry Todd, retired Colonel, Army, and I'm so appreciative that he's with us here today too. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Drive safe.
Senator Janal.
Thank you, Mr. President, and the members of the Local Government Committee. I just want to remind you that, and this goes to any senator who's in here, we have on Monday, February 10th at 8 a.m. in Senate Committee Room 357, we have a delegation of 11 visiting professionals from North Africa and the Middle East, accompanied by 3 interpreters. This delegation is in Colorado on an exchange program facilitated by a partnership between the United States Department of State and a nonprofit called World Denver, and are here to learn about how government interacts with non-governmental organizations. So it was put in front of the Local Government Committee, but I think anyone who wants to come to the Monday's meeting with these folks from North Africa and the Middle East. Again, it's Monday at 8 a.m. in Senate Room 357. We'd be honored to have you all, and I think they would love to meet you, and you should want to meet them. And so have a great weekend.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next week's calendar on Wednesday for Judiciary Committee, Senate Bill 76 is going to be moved up a week. Thank you. Maybe 129 might be postponed.
Having no further announcements, Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate adjourn until Monday, February 10th, 2020.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. The Senate will stand in adjournment until 10:00 hours on Monday, February 10th, 2020.